Welcome to the Cinematologist Podcast. My name is Dario Linares, and down the line, of course, is my good friend Neil Fox. Neil, great to speak to you again.
Really lovely to talk to you, and nice that it's only been a few days since we last spoke.
Yes, indeed. So this is the first episode that is airing that has the material from Filmstock 12, which is the film festival that you have just organised, or you've just finished delivering. You know, the organisation of film festivals does take a lot of time. So yeah, do you want to sort of tell us a little bit about that? We've got various episodes coming from Filmstock, but maybe just sort of give a little trail as to what people can expect.
Yeah, so Filmstock 12 is an independent film festival that I've co-directed with Justin Doherty, and we've just done a 10th anniversary edition, which took place over 4 days in Luton, my hometown, and Justin's hometown. And yeah, we recorded a lot of stuff. You were there all weekend, which was great, and you recorded some interviews with some of the independent filmmakers who were in attendance for a variety of films. So that'll be an episode that will go out, and we'll talk more about Filmstock there, where you'll kind of grill me on running a film festival, I'm sure. And
yeah, I'm sure I will.
And but we also did some long form conversations. So it was a really lovely weekend. Spent time with Jeannie Finley, who's been on the pod before, Kieran Evans, who's also been on the pod before, and kind of just getting really in depth about their work. And I spent time having a conversation with M.R. Carey, also known as Mike Carey, who was the screenwriter for The Girl with All the Gifts and is a really amazing comic book writer and novelist. So those three will be kind of standalone episodes because they were just really great conversations. And then the fourth one was a conversation with someone that our listeners will be very familiar with, which was Mark Jenkin. And we thought we'd get this one out to coincide with the end of year hurrah for Bait, which seems to be occurring right at the moment that we record this.
Yeah, indeed. Just this morning, the Sight and Sound poll has come out, and Bait is number 8 in that, which I'm kind of, again, it goes back to my lists and awards. I don't know whether aversion is the right word, but just sort of questioning of what they do and what they're for. But it's kind of good and bad, I think. I mean, it's amazing that the film is on there, and I think it was always going to be quite high up, considering, the readership of Sight and Sound and the amount of publicity and how well Bait is done and how good a film it is, never mind all that. But then, you see other films around it, and then you have your questions about, how such lists are set up. But yeah, and then there's also the Independent Film Awards this Sunday.
And then last night it won Best British Film at the Screen Daily Awards, and the BFI won Best Campaign. So it's another moment in a year of moments for Mark and the team.
Yeah, so it was great to get him back on the podcast, because obviously he's been very busy throughout the year, and he sort of has been on quite a bit, hasn't he? Pre-Bait, but then his the campaign and the success of the film has dragged him in brilliantly in so many different places and spoken to so many different people, and it was really nice to get him back and have that time to chat. And I had approaches to what I wanted to say to him to try and pull him into different directions, which was really nice. And he was as forthcoming, and he's really sort of, he's a seasoned campaigner at the Q&A circuit now, which is great.
Be interesting to listen back to the short chat that I had with him at Berlin just after just before he left, after a whirlwind few days of screenings there, and sort of compare how he's talking about the film now to how he talked about it as it was just kind of exploding back then. Be interesting to see, because it's great, because obviously there is a narrative that he's built up from doing it for so long, but it never feels like he's churning out the old answers. He's deeply passionate and thoughtful about his work and the film, which is great. And I think that the conversation that you had with him at Filmstock was a really, really great one, touching on a lot of things, which was not just about Bait, but kind of bringing some of that stuff up that we've known for a long time about his work, up to the point of where Bait kind of puts him in a different space and kind of brings him to a much wider attention.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I always had that attention, because obviously there are lots of Q&As now. You can look at YouTube with the more mainstream lights than us, let's say. But I think the one thing that I really liked about this is I think that Mark sort of recognises the history and the not just the history with the podcast, but the history with you and I, in terms of we taught at the same university, and we come from a similar sort of, I don't want to say level, but appreciation and understanding of that there is a British film industry and a sort of, I don't want to say a clique, but you know what I mean. There are circles that one runs in, and Mark is definitely now in a different circle, let's say, because he's got the potential to be because of Bait, but
or a different layer of Dante's Inferno.
Yes, yeah, maybe so. I mean, it's really fascinating to speak to him about that and where he's going to go in his career, because there are, off mic, he sort of talks about some of the difficulties that is bringing, but again, I think he's very forthright in what he says, particularly around politics. So I think we'll get straight into it, Neil, yes, and then we can talk a little bit more about what he said afterwards. So this is myself talking to Mark Jenkin at Filmstock. Welcome to the cinematologists at Filmstock, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Mark Jenkin.
Thank you.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. It's great to talk to you. Now gallivanting around the cosmos. I didn't really know how to start. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk quite a lot about Bait, maybe a little bit later on, but we'll talk about your other work. But I want to start by sort of taking you back to February the 9th. And you and I and your team were in the foyer of the Film Palace in Berlin.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you sort of thought back to that moment, and was that a sort of seminal moment? And now we're coming to the end of the year. Have you had a chance to kind of just sort of look back at what's happened over the past year?
Yeah, I keep thinking back. Was it the 9th? I keep thinking it's the 10th.
Oh, right. Maybe. I thought it was the 9th for my diary, but there we go.
I mean, I do keep thinking back to that, because that was the world premiere. And so it would have been special, whatever happened, but because the film sort of blew up from there, it is, it's got a kind of special time, even if I can't quite remember the date.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, I think I saw you outside, didn't I? And there was a massive crowd outside the cinema. Me and my partner Mary had just arrived in the hotel opposite about half an hour before, and then walked across the road and there was just crowds of people outside.
Was it 800-seater?
666.
Yeah. Wow. nice number.
Yeah. And we sort of worked our way through the crowd and joined the queue, and I thought, I wonder what else is on tonight. And then somebody said it's a single screen theatre, and I thought, oh shit. And and then the big thing was for me was that there was everybody was still there at the end. That was the sort of thing that at the time was really special, that nobody left, because I've been told, people walk out all the time, and people go and see other things, and people book for stuff they haven't done any research about, and then they realise 5 minutes in that they don't want to watch it. But
I was sat right at the back on the balcony as well, and there was certain moments in the film, key moments that I won't spoil, but when there was that palpable gasp moment, so it was working right to the back of such a big cinema, which is amazing.
Yeah, and I'd never been in a cinema like that before.
No.
A few weeks before we'd done the cast and crew screening in Luton in a cinema that seats 76. That was pretty intimidating. So to be in that size cinema was pretty overwhelming, really.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll come back to Bait a little bit later on, but I wanted to go even further back to 2002, and we're going to play a few clips of various things. And the first clip we're going to play, but you can set it up for us, is Golden Burn, which is your first feature. I hate, it's difficult to sort of say that now, because
depends who you talk to.
That's what I'm saying. It's like in every sort of BFI or newspapers, it's like Mark Jenkin directorial debut. It's not bollocks, it isn't, But
and then I get, whenever that happens, then I get loads of people who work with me on my other films getting in contact saying, you've written us out of your history. But it's not, it's the definition of the first film is really difficult, and I'm quite uncomfortable with it at times. I was in Istanbul in April, and we were up for the Golden Tulip, the main competition prize, which is only, I think you have to be a debut director to win the prize. And I was sat there in the awards ceremony thinking, I really hope we don't win this.
Yeah.
Which is a really unique feeling.
Yeah.
Because normally I think, I really want to win it, and then pretend afterwards that it didn't matter. But on this one, I was genuinely thinking, I really hope we don't win this, because it might be great to go up there and pick it up.
Yeah.
But it's going to be horrible to have to hand it back.
Yeah. No, it's crazy.
When they find out that I've done other films.
Yeah. So you submitted Golden Burn to Filmstock in 2002, and that's how you met Neil. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually come here.
Okay.
It's the first time I've been to Luton.
Right.
But I did submit the film. Yeah, I shot it in 1999, and then I finished it in 2002. I was working for a company in a post-production house in London, and as soon as I got to London, I was at Bournemouth for 3 years, and then I stayed in Bournemouth for a little while longer, working as a builder for a while, and then I ended up moving to London. I worked at a post-production house, and once I was in London, I realised how much I wanted to live back in Cornwall. And part of my therapy for dealing with not being able to be in Cornwall was to write a film about growing up in Cornwall. I took 2 weeks holiday just after the eclipse, which was I think August the 11th, 1999, so the second 2 weeks of August, went back to Cornwall and shot this film, and then spent 2 years editing it once I got back to London. And I used to, in the post-production house, I used to sneak off from what I was supposed to be doing and go into an edit suite and work on the film.
Right.
And then I got sacked because I wasn't ever doing what I was supposed to do. But the edit suite was it's just been recorded, isn't it?
Just tell me where the cut point is to be.
Yeah. But the edit suite was in a different building, which you just had to know the key code. So after I'd been fired, I used to still go back in the nights and at the weekend and edit. And it was where the tape library was for the post-production house and the film library. So quite often somebody would come down to pick up a film, and I used to have to lie behind this low wall between the edit suite and this little kitchen area. But I managed to, I finished the film in summer of 2001, and then Filmstock was just one of the festivals that I submitted it to, and
it's a feature, isn't it? So have you made you've made obviously shorts up to that point, but was this?
No, I just went straight
to feature. Okay, so
I was asked to talk at a festival the other day about development from shorts to features. And I can't do that. I started with this. I think it's 70 minutes or 68 minutes or whatever people decide
define as a feature. You've got over 60, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, maybe,
So, in terms of the development of your filmmaking, then, do you look back at this film as a sort of blueprint for your development at all, or is it, does it encapsulate the things that you're still interested in?
Yeah, definitely. And I sort of think of this film as the film that set me up as somebody who was self-sufficient, and somebody who, if I'm told that I can't do something, then that will mean that I will definitely then do it, which was the situation with this film, where people said make a short, and I just thought, if you're going to make a short, and this is personally, if I was going to make a short, I might as well make a feature film. And I think shorts are much harder to make than feature films, so I thought it'd be much easier to tell this story in a long-winded way rather than a concise way. And I think maybe in terms of the themes and the type of storytelling, this is a million miles away from what I do now, but I wrote Bait while I was editing this in 2001. So in fact, we shot draft 42 of Bait, and it had been written, I'd spent 20 years writing it. So it was written at the same time as this, and in fact, our mutual friend Denzel, who is an associate producer on Bait, when he first saw the edit, his first comment was, well, this is the sequel to Golden Burn.
Right.
So they're quite closely linked. That doesn't mean this is not going to be excruciating for me to watch.
Now for the next 6 minutes.
Especially the prologue, which is pretty on the nose.
Okay. Well, we'll play the first. I think we've got the first 6 minutes of the film, so feel free to kind of hide or something. So can we play the clip of Golden Burn, and then we'll talk a bit more about it?
What's your Cornwall? Weekend getaway? Summer retreat? Sailing in Fowey? King Arthur at Tintagel? Traffic jams on the ever-widening A30? Fishing trips from Padstow? Roughing it in a tent? Surfing at Fistral? Cornish pasty and chips? Clotted cream? Pixies? Or is it your home? Not your second home. Your only home. Every June an invasion begins. The coastal population of Cornwall swells. Thanks to the caravan park and the hotel, the population of Porth Hale grows by over 200% during the summer. Loads of the Cornish coast is pretty much a holiday park now. Loads of visitors and part-timers. When you've lived there all your life, it's easy to forget that it was ever any different, and for the tourists and part-timers it must be impossible for them to know. Some of those visitors stay for a couple of days. Some stay for a couple of weeks. Some of them stay and just become locals.
Sorry. I didn't hurt you, did I?
No, I mate, I'm used to it.
Let's have the ball, Henry.
Shut up! You're living at Rose's cottage, aren't you?
Yeah, I've just moved in there. Does he want to play?
What's your name?
Chris.
Chris. My name's Henry.
Does he want to play?
Jim Chapman, went to school with him. Good longboarder, great photographer.
Do you want to play?
Yeah, cool.
Right, yeah.
You'll have to play in goal, right?
Yeah, you have to play in goal.
All right then.
Jim's best mate Doshi, great shortboarder. Famous in the village because of his eccentric dad.
Yeah, just moved into Rose's cottage.
Nice glasses, mate.
Cheers.
Now, you'll find us a pretty agreeable bunch, OK? But don't pay too many minds to the chairman, eh?
Right.
Should I talk more outside? That way we'll get contentious issues out of the way first.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending. This meeting's been called by the Parish Council at the request of various members of the community who are concerned about the forthcoming season. You all have a copy of the agenda. As you'll see, there are 6 items. Just a point of order, we're going to shift item 4 up to item 2. So the item on road signs now is item 2, and item 2 becomes item 3, grass cutting.
Nick Chapman, Jim's old man, fisherman and chairman of the Parish Council.
Item 1, the beach. Once again, the beach dominates the proceedings. The beach and the fears that people have for it. Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Chairman, as I said at the last meeting, something has got to be done about the amount of litter on the high tide line. It's just as bad as it was last year.
Yeah, we've written to the District Council several times
We should close the beach at night.
Sitting next to Matt's just literally squirming there when that was being played. But
I was just, because I'm in the film as well, I was just terrified that it was going to play long enough for me to appear.
Yeah, we managed to exercise that. But how? I mean, clearly the sort of questions of the politics and the economics of what's going on in Cornwall is there already. I mean, is that something that you were kind of thinking about, like at school, and discussing with friends, and you know, how did that sort of become ingrained in your thoughts?
Yeah, the idea of Cornwall being a holiday park was a sort of preoccupation. And actually in my narration, they said a lot of Cornwall's pretty much a holiday park, and Bait was called the holiday park until not long before we shot it. It was still called the holiday park.
Yeah.
So I think it was something that was, I think what happened was I moved away from Cornwall. I spent so much of my youth wanting to get away to find out where the party really was.
Yeah.
And then I didn't really think that much about being Cornish or Cornwall until I left. And then as soon as I went over the border, I became the most Cornish person anybody had ever met. and wanted to sort of move back. And then at the time, it was just very difficult to imagine ever moving back to Cornwall and ever being able to do certainly what I do now, but any kind of sort of profession was very limited, because it was the start of Brand Cornwall.
Right.
This thing where you could monetize culture, tradition, the environment. It was the kind of the beginning of all of that, or certainly the start of my awareness of it. It wasn't the beginning of it, of course, because Nick Darke, who's my great mentor, who's in the film playing the head of the chair of the parish council there, you know, he said that his dad said to him in 1981 that he said, Cornwall's fucked.
Yeah.
So I think every generation sort of recognises this over-reliance on selling the place over and over again.
And was it a combination as well of sort of working in London? I don't know if you were doing sort of commercial projects or ads or whatever it was, but then sort of thinking there is nowhere for me to kind of express myself and make films in the way that I want here?
Yeah, I'm never one to wait to be given the permission to do something. So I thought I worked in the film industry when I was in London. I was cutting film trailers, effectively. And one day I just woke up and thought, I work in marketing. I don't work in the film industry.
Yeah.
And it was like later that day that I decided to move back to Cornwall. And there's nothing against marketing, but I didn't.
You didn't want to do it.
No. I thought, what?
Yeah.
I'm cutting film trailers for that really bad Jean-Claude Van Damme films for Channel 5.
Oh, that was you.
I'm not working in the film industry. So, but I think by then I'd already, Golden Burn was finished. It played at the Celtic Film Festival, which is a Cornish person is a big deal, because it's a film festival where you're recognised as Cornish rather than being English, which is really important. And it won the First Time Director prize. So I was a first time director in 2002 as well as now. And that got me noticed in Cornwall, which for me was the only thing that mattered. And at the time there was a huge amount of European money going into Cornwall. Just thankfully that's going to stop.
Well, the Tories will make it up, don't worry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so the success of Golden Burn sort of on the pan Celtic stage, which is very important for me, got me the attention needed to be able to be given a grant to work in Cornwall on a new film. And I moved back in 2002, got some money, got a grant, and started writing a script. And that's been.
And just before we move off Golden Burn, when you were in London, did you sort of think that there is the infrastructure and like the friendship group and maybe the sort of production possibilities in Cornwall to do this, or is it just literally because I don't care what I will work it out when I get there?
No, there was nothing.
Right.
I mean, from my point of view, there was nothing. When I got back, I realised there was a real a grassroots filmmaking community, which I will be forever indebted to. Is what the Cornwall Film Festival was born out of. It was a group called CMR, the Cornwall Media Resource, but they weren't visible outside of Cornwall. So I wasn't in London thinking I need to get back to Cornwall because all of this opportunities down there. The university wasn't there. Yeah. There was nothing really there, and actually my friendship group wasn't there because everybody had done the same as me. They'd moved away. Yeah. So my sort of group of friends and my family, my new family and all of that kind of stuff, all comes out of moving back to this burgeoning industry. And meeting everybody afresh in 2002.
Yeah, and you mentioned there Nick Darke, who you obviously sort of mention a lot, and is a mentor to you. And I've written some things down about the correlation between you and him and what he may have done for you, not just in terms of the sort of instrumental career, but just as an inspiration and that kind of thing. I mean, again, without being facetious. Maybe not everybody in the audience knows who Nick Darke is, but maybe you sort of explain, the kind of impact he had on you.
Yeah, well, Nick was a playwright who was, he was much more than just the kind of voice of Cornwall, but for me, he was that voice of Cornwall. He was, he was at the Royal Court and, much bigger than a Cornish playwright, but for me, he is that sort of voice of Cornwall, and he made sense of what it meant to be Cornish at a time when being proud of being Cornish was quite a complicated thing, because what were you proud of, you know? And he made sense of what it meant to be Cornish, and to be proud of where you come from, and proud of tradition and the culture, but also to be outward looking and inclusive, and just, you know, he just had the most incredible mind. And, you know, if you read his work, his plays, it's all in there, you know, just this incredible writer. But and so I met him through my best friend at school, Jim, and another guy, Henry, his two sons, and so they're both in this film. And so I sort of I got to know Nick as my mate's dad, really. And then as I got into writing and felt that I had something to say through film, I realised my mate's dad was this, you know, I had access to this guy, and we became very close. And through this film, most of it shot at his house, him and his wife Jane, their house where Jane still lives, and it's this amazing house near the beach. The generations of his family lived in, and we were able to use it for several different locations. And at the same time as we were doing this, Nick had a commission to write a 3-part drama series for BBC, and I persuaded Nick to be in the film, you know, as you've seen, and he just loved having these young people around making a film. And actually he got in touch with his agent and said, I found the director for my BBC series. Right. And of course I was that 23-year-old who'd done nothing. Yeah. So I think the response was, yeah, okay. But you know, the belief that he gave me this, you know, I would read everything of his that I read. This is just incredible, and he wants to work with me. So the momentum that gave me, I still live off that now.
Yeah, and he was somebody as well very concerned with the past, but also not in a sort of maudlin, overly sentimental way. Just how does that shape the present and the future, and that obviously sort of is key in your work.
Yeah, I think that I talk quite a lot about, because I have to justify the way I work to people quite a lot, because, you know, as I've been called many times on Twitter, you know, when people say something about the way I made the film, often the response is, "Oh, he sounds like a hipster cunt." You know, I get used to being called that quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I have to justify the way I work, and that it isn't gesture and it isn't fashion. Yeah. It's something that I'm interested in, a way of working that has been left behind through progress, and that's kind of what the theme of my work is about. You know, progress is inevitable, and it's important, and it's essential, and without progression, you know, as a species or whatever, we die out. That doesn't mean we shouldn't look at what we lose as we progress, and who decides how we progress. And Nick was very interested in that.
Yeah.
And on a very local level, the rebranding of Cornwall. What do we lose in the quest for ever more visitors? You know. And he was very careful the way he talked about it, and I cringed then, because I said, you know, talked about Cornwall and said, you know, every year an invasion begins. And, you know, using the word invasion, oh wow, you know.
But it's also that somebody decides these things. It's not that it just happens for no reason, you know.
No, and the idea that it's somehow natural, you know, but it's not. It's just a small group of people making a hell of a lot of money and disempowering a lot of other people, whose alienation and frustration then manifests itself in very dangerous ways, and that's where we're living today.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of next few projects, I mean, the Midnight Drives is one, you know, obviously that again was sort of successful, and I'm wondering, you know, you're working with a group of people now, and then you cast Colin Holt, who got a lot of plaudits for that role. Is it important for you that they're Cornish? You know, how important is that they understand the sensibility? But how much is it about, you know, finding people that you trust, and, you know, like we were talking a bit outside, that you can sort of, you know, meet and discuss with, and they're on the same wavelength kind of thing?
Yeah, the Cornishness thing is important in terms of the sensibility, but that's got nothing to do with, you know, that you kind of have to address what I would mean by Cornishness, and it's not, you know, I've got the same beliefs as Norman Tebbit in terms of what belonging to a country means. You know, some of the most Cornish people I know aren't technically Cornish, however you want to define that, but yeah, they've got to share my sensibility, but sometimes be totally at odds with it. because that's how the creative process works. Sometimes you need those people who don't share your sort of ideas about something, but are fully engaged in the way that a thing is being done, and that's all of my work is done in that way. Somebody like Colin, in some ways, I think pretty much everything I've done, Colin's been involved in one way or another, whether it's in front of the camera or behind the camera. But that's not to say we agree with everything with each other all the time. We have big disagreements about how things should be done and what we should do and stuff like that, but it's a really healthy relationship in that sense most of the time. Can be destructive like all close working relationships, but I've got a very strong tight-knit group of collaborators.
Yeah, because Cornish film is a thing, isn't it? You know what I mean? And for better or worse sometimes, and it's sort of being part of that is an interesting dynamic, having worked there and being from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is really. I can only talk about my work. I don't, whether there's a movement or an industry, or you could say yes, but you could also argue there isn't.
And were you involved with the university around this time? When did that sort of relationship?
What with the Midnight Drives?
Yeah, was it around sort of
2007? Yeah, so I think I went in. We had a rough cut of the film in 2007 and went into the university to...
This is Falmouth University.
Yeah, Falmouth University to... and it was when the course was becoming more of a practical course, or it was introducing a practical element to what was a theory course. And me and Simon Harvey, who's the producer, were invited in to screen a rough cut in probably 2007, and neither of us really left.
Now how do you find sort of the teaching, creative practice element of your career? Because I think it's part of it. I think knowing you well and working with students and that kind of thing. How do you find that?
I'd love working at the university in terms of the teaching and the engagement, especially with theory. When I did a similar degree that they teach at Falmouth, and I never engaged with any of the theory. I've got Bordwell and Thompson's film art, right, which has never been opened. 3 years, it clearly has never been opened. Right. And then as soon as I started teaching, even though I was teaching on the practice side of it, suddenly all this theory opened up to me because I was meeting people like yourself, and I was thinking, God, this is like, this is a whole department where people just talk about film, and people just think about film, which can be quite unhealthy as well, but it's really inspiring and got me to engage much more with film history and and theory and the academic side of it, which has been amazing. I had 2 years out of the university quite recently, where I was sort of on a retainer for another project. So I wasn't at the university, and a bit of my brain definitely went to sleep in terms of engaging with the academic side of it. And the Bordwell and Thompson book, I read that in the bath for fun now.
Right.
So I think it just shows that education's wasted on the young.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't possibly comment. So we're going to show a full short of yours now, called Vertical Shapes in a Horizontal Landscape. And I remember this fondly because we met up in Hastings. I think we were at... Were we at Andrew Kötting's screening, or was it you screening with him? I can't remember.
We were screening together.
Yeah.
What had happened was that Theresa May called the snap election.
Yeah.
And on the Thursday, me and you were chatting on Twitter, I think, and you were quite... You'd had a drink or two.
Yeah, no,
I you were going to go down to the recount
of Amber Rudd's.
And I said,
and you were encouraging me to do it.
I'll try and spot you on the TV because it was like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. And they had the third recount because it was 300 votes.
And it was so exciting because it was like because the exit poll had come out and it thought, oh God, there's some hope. And then all of it, and it just felt like everything was falling down around us. And I'd said to myself, I'm not going to stay up because the next day I had to travel to Hastings, which from Cornwall is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because you have to go to London and then
down. Yeah.
So I thought I don't want to be up all night. But anyway, me and you ended up sort of staying up most of the night chatting about what was going to happen. Went up to Hastings, and then on the Friday night we were
at the Electric Palace.
Yeah, which was an exciting time because it was, you know, I'm talking from my own political beliefs. I'm not assuming everybody agrees with me here, but it was quite an exciting time because there was no government, was there?
Yeah.
And then the DUP turned up.
Yeah.
But it was quite exciting for a time because it felt like there was a little bit of hope. And and we did the screening with Andrew on Friday, and then I went round to his on Saturday morning and had breakfast at his place, and then I walked 26 miles from his house to Dungeness. And the idea was that I was going to walk from Andrew's house, who's a great hero of mine, I've been lucky enough to get quite good friends with, from his house to Derek Jarman's grave in Romney Marsh. And that was the idea of these vertical shapes in the horizontal landscape. So the horizontal landscape being the dull world of film, and these sort of vertical colossus in my mind of art, you know. I say that now. I actually had the title before I thought of the film, and I made a film that was based around the title.
Yeah.
You know, sort of like,
but it was a kind of delirious moment you were saying, because, you know, with all the political stuff you talked about, and then but you had the idea of you were going to, you know, because it's on 16 mil, is that right?
Super 8.
Super 8, sorry, beg your pardon. And you were going to shoot a certain portion of the time there and then back again.
Yeah, so the plan was, Andrew gave me directions. The film starts very quickly, and there's a bit of narration at the beginning that people have always told me they miss, but so I'll tell you what it is now before you hear it. But Andrew basically gave me directions to where Derek's grave was, because I've been to Derek Jarman's house in Dungeness loads of times and photographed it and all that kind of stuff. I'd never been to his grave, which is in a churchyard in Romney Marsh. So I worked out on the map that it was 26 miles. I had 2 rolls of Super 8 film. I'd shoot the first roll between Hastings and Rye, and when I got to Rye, I changed the roll, and then I would shoot the second roll between Rye and Grave. It was a 26-mile walk. I spent the whole day on my own. I went a little bit insane. I forgot where I was going and ended up at his house and forgot to walk to the grave. To the grave, which is kind of spoiler. That's the but but it was that was the sort of the feeling of it was that everything was a little bit uncertain, and it was you know, it was June. Yeah, it was so hot. It was that bit of England, that coast is so weird and alien, and I meant to, you know, I was going to have breakfast at Andrew's 9 o'clock in the morning and then go, and then we ended up talking for about 3 hours, and then I walked from St Leonard's to Hastings, and it was midday when I got to Hastings. And then I found out, this is in the film, so there's no point watching the film, the cliff path had fallen down. So then I couldn't even walk the first bit, and I had to wait for a bus, and it was just, but nothing mattered, because it was like, for the first time in forever, things weren't totally depressing.
Okay, let's play the film.
I stopped at the co-op and ate an apple outside whilst looking at the wooden church of St Richard. I lay in the field beside a drainage ditch, summoning up the energy to continue on to Rye, where at a junction I realised I had been before and saw evidence of like-minded people. We've imposed a structure on ourselves. We've gone running towards painless, wipe-clean consensus with our arms out wide. The decision has been made, and the committee who meet in public have inevitably settled on vanilla.
I think it's kind of a bit simplistic to categorize you as either like a fictional or a documentary filmmaker. You know, it can't be put in those terms. But how do you? It seems to me that a film like this, you're using film not just to orientate yourself to the world and the landscape, but almost as a filmmaker. You know, it's like you have to make this film to sort of get a sense of what's going on. Is that right?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I mean, it's like I feel like just asking the question, why did you make that? There's not an easy answer, is there?
Why did you make that? I just like to be making stuff.
Yeah.
That's the main thing, you know. And I think it's probably best not to analyse it too much, because the idea that anybody has got any interest in listening to what I'd want to say might stop me from doing it. I mean, these diary films were born out of my frustration with being in development with other film projects and wanting to be making work, and thinking, well, I can just make films that are just for me. And if I'm going to do that, I want to shoot on Super 8, because I just love shooting on Super 8. It's what I started with. It's got a discipline to it that I really love. So I made a film in 2015, I think, called Dear Marianne, which was kind of the same structure as this. And I never intended to show anybody. And a producer friend of mine, who was actually here yesterday, saw a clip of it online that I just put a tiny snippet of it up, and she wanted to see the rest of it. She saw it, she said, "This is great, you should share it." So I did, and then that film's by far the most successful film I've ever made. It's played everywhere, it's played at all the big short film festivals, and
they were sorry at LFF when you were Q&A.
Yeah, and I mean it was at Oberhausen, and it's played in America. It's played, and it's and I just made it for me.
Yeah, but it is in that experimental travelogue tradition as well, isn't it? Maybe not intentionally, but
Yeah, I mean, I always think at the end where it says, I sit down amongst the Valerian and sea kale and think of kind Nick back in Hastings and hope that Terry will be back to his old self. It's like, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. That's a character. That's a bloke I've not mentioned in the rest of the film, and Terry is his dog. But and in years to come, maybe even I'll watch it and think, who's Nick and Terry? But there's something within it. I think that the mood of it. I'm a big believer in Bresson's theory that it's more important to feel a film than understand it. And I think by just making stuff yourself, it becomes so specific that it's got, I feel that film, I remember that day, I remember the emotions, and I still feel that when I watch it. And I think maybe the reason it plays so well is just because people recognise that. They don't have to understand what it is. It just captures something that, maybe people don't.
Before you, just sort of leading on from that, you're talking about maybe, and I've read this, that sort of disillusionment with the sort of digital and this kind of stuff, and then before you made Bait, you made Bronco's House. So, and that was the first, am I right in saying that's the first sort of major film that you shot with the Bolex and using the process that now is talked about around Bait?
Yeah, first narrative film. Yeah, I mean, I was just bored stiff by what I was doing. Not necessarily by other people's stuff, but I had no energy for the process because I didn't understand the process. The cameras that I was using, you start a shoot with this cutting edge camera. By the end of the shoot, it was out of date, and I just couldn't keep up with that idea of technology.
Yeah.
And I would talk to students, and I was doing like practical workshops with students, and I'd get up and try and talk about a new camera, and I just open my mouth and think, oh God, I just what's Grandad got to say? Because these people know far more than me, and I thought I just need to disengage with the technological side of it. Because that was what was leaving me cold. I was shooting stuff on a DSLR, and I thought, this is the future. Yeah. I've got this camera, I can operate it, but still, this little bastard was making creative decisions for me. This little computer that had been programmed by somebody else, and I just thought, and I was, tell how bitter I was. But and I made a film like that, and I loved the film, but I didn't really like the process. It didn't feel like filmmaking to me. And I know I sound like an old.
Sure.
Being nostalgic or whatever, but then, as I've said many times in interviews, I got ill, not related to shooting on a digital camera, something else, and then I had to have an operation, and then I was laid up on the sofa for weeks, and I watched Mark Cousins' The Story of Film, 15-hour documentary. I watched that twice, and I thought, I want to capture the passion that man's got for filmmaking. And so I went back to what I'd loved doing, which was shooting on Super 8, the alchemy of an image arriving and all that kind of stuff. It was never an aesthetic thing,
Right, okay. So it's not the connection between the materiality of doing it on film and processing or all that stuff you do yourself, and then somehow that materiality is burned into the image somehow. It's just more about you.
I don't understand it. I don't understand why I love it so much. I'm quite, you know, I quite often try and rationalise it, but I just love it, and that's why I love it so much. Is because I don't know why. You know, film's just weird, isn't it? You know, you capture light, and it creates images, and then you record sound, and then you mess around with time, and suddenly you're recreating a sense of the unconscious or the conscious that you can't articulate in words, you know, and a lot of that is to do with the decisions you're forced into making through limitation, which I think I'd lost shooting digitally. That I just thought, this is brilliant, I could just hoover up everything that's going on. And actually, by doing that, I missed the essence of what was so special about film and what had originally inspired me to want to go out and capture images. So, and also I do like the physical work of it. You know, I like to still think of myself as a working person. So I don't want to be sat at a desk like tapping one finger on a mouse button. I don't want to be, you know, I like the time pressure of it and all of that kind of stuff. So,
sure. And that then brings us to bait. Was there a sense you think that, again, maybe it's not even a deliberate or a thing that you kind of thought of consciously, but with this process that you got back to, and then after, you know, that fleeting moment where anything was possible, you know, when there was no government, there was maybe a sort of shift, you know, for the rest of us, for the UK and around the world, if you think of other areas and Trump and all this kind of stuff, where there's anger underpinning people's thoughts. And I just wondered whether that somehow triggered you redeveloping or bringing this project back, because it was a project that had a long gestation period, is that right?
Yeah, well, we were ready to shoot in September 2016, so the film predates any of that stuff that happened in 2016 happening, but it was born out of how I felt for 20 years before that, which was the situation we were in then, was the thing that led to 2016. The idea that everybody got angry or vocal in 2016 is kind of nonsense. You know, 2016 was a result of ordinary people being fucked over for a generation, and that was just the point where it just came out. So it's funny that the film, you know, in Berlin, we talked about the premiere, where I was sat there with Mary, and she was sort of like holding my hand, and as the film was playing, and then suddenly the radio report in the film that happens during one of the early scenes in the holidaymaker's kitchen, which is all about Brexit, because it was in Germany, suddenly that was subtitled. Yeah. So I like clenched Mary's hand and went, oh shit, you know.
This is amazing to me as well, because it changed the film. Yeah, it does change the film, because that was the second time I'd seen it without those subtitles. And
then I thought, oh, maybe it's just me that's thinking that, and then I got up and did the Q&A, and the first question was about Brexit. Yeah. And then thought, oh my God, and you know, and for 4 or 5 days I was Britain's unofficial spokesperson for Brexit at the Berlinale.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, and so and it's been really handy, you know, publicity-wise. It's great because people say, "Oh, it's the first Brexit film." So then everybody's got an opinion on Brexit, so people can key into the film in that way. It's been commercially, it's been fantastic. Yeah. But it's not about Brexit. It's about actually what happened. What happened to cause Brexit? What happened internationally to cause Trump? What, you know, where does populism come from? You know, what is the alienation that breeds the move towards populism? So I think it comes from being in somewhere like Cornwall, where it's the type of place that gets hit first if there's an economic crisis. It's the place that recovers last. I mean, I expect it's similar in a town like Luton, you know. Then it's outside of, you know, I hate the word the bubble, but it's outside of where the focus is. And so the idea that the Brexit result is some kind of surprise is laughable when you're living in somewhere that has been forgotten and people are given the chance to reject something.
Yeah, and we'll play the trailer in a second, but one thing that maybe gets overlooked a little bit is the casting. And did you have Edward in mind for the lead? I mean, obviously he's a very specific Cornish persona again, if I can use that phrase?
He actually auditioned 10 years ago for the part of the younger guy.
Right, okay.
And we always laugh about it because I can't remember him auditioning, but he can. But my memories of the audition process are based on, we did an open casting thing, which is something that I don't do anymore. I don't like that process, but one of the tapes disappeared, and I think he must be on the tape that disappeared. So, but I met him. He worked with Mary on a big site-specific theatre piece, and I just thought he was great as a performer. And he's a big bloke.
Yeah.
Physically, he's fantastic for that kind of character. And he's just by trade, as well as a trained theatre actor, he's a stand-up comic. He's got this alter ego, Kerno King. And I like the idea of working with funny people and then not giving them the chance to really rely on that, and looking at the kind of tragedy that might be behind that humour.
Yeah.
And once we decided, there was no looking back really. He was, and now I can't imagine anybody else playing that.
No. I mean, it was amazing. Sort of when we were in the Curzon in Bloomsbury, and there's Edward Rowe from Cornwall and Brad Pitt next to each other on the posters, which was fantastic. I thought.
Yeah.
And then I think just as important though is Simon Shepherd and Mary Woodvine, and they're really important in terms of the roles that they're playing that have to have a character behind them, but they're also, embodying the things that you're criticising. And particularly, I love that, what you talk about, Simon, sort of being the David Cameron character.
Yeah, that was my direction. He asked me for some direction at some point, which I tend not to give too much direction once the casting's done. And there was a particular scene, he said, how do I play it? And I said, just play it like David Cameron. Just be charismatic and charming and the life and soul of the party, until somebody tells you that you're not allowed to do the thing that Mummy always told you could do, and then you just throw your toys out of the pram. But he would, Mary and Simon are the two most experienced actors in the film. They're both experienced TV actors. Mary's done a lot of film as well, so it was kind of something quite interesting in bringing in experienced actors to play those roles, when a lot of the more local characters were maybe less experienced in terms of the dynamic there. But it's funny because Mary, she's a working actor. She's great. She's successful. And then the day after the wrap party, she goes back to her day job, which is cleaning holiday cottages.
Yeah.
So it's art and life, all that kind of stuff, all sort of overlaps, and which I think is, that character has to be empathetic. She has to recognise.
She can't be an evil person.
Hopefully there's no evil people in it. It's just there's just different levels of ignorance. Relating to a specific situation, and I think she does have an element of redemption. I think it's slightly misjudged what she does, but it comes from a good place.
Right. Can we play the trailer for Faith, please?
Evening, Mrs. Peters.
Evening, Martin.
Lovely day.
Paul and Silas bound in jail, got no money for their bail. You keep your eyes on the prize and you roll right on.
Yo, what on?
Nothing much.
Getting many?
Not enough.
And Paul and Silas thought they were lost.
Why don't you just go back working with Stephen for a bit?
I got bloody principles.
Keep your eyes on the prize and you roll right on.
I'm going to have to ask you again not to leave your truck outside. What are you doing, Martin?
It's between me and the clamping company.
Hold on, hold on.
You didn't have to sell us this house.
Didn't we?
Keep your eyes on the prize and you roll right on.
He was so posh, I honestly thought he was speaking German.
Losing your temper isn't going to help.
I haven't lost my temper yet. Your old man wouldn't have shut the pub in the winter. Bloody disgrace you are. Sell out!
Get out!
we're supposed to finish at 4, but I'm going to carry on until we get kicked out, basically. So I'm going to come out to the audience to give you a chance to ask Mark any questions. But just a couple of things to finish off from me. The aesthetic to all your films. I mean, obviously this has its particular kind of aesthetic, but then your interest in the representation of Cornwall, Cornish identity, and that critique you have, I think, of the sort of either the Poldark romanticisation or the sort of Cornish stereotype of that we need a regional idiot to kind of function in a narrative. I've heard you sort of criticise that. So, how do you sort of think about your approach to representing this place that's so sort of important and fundamental to you?
I see it as a sort of redressing the balance, really, of how Cornwall has been used as a backdrop, really. And the thing that I think you're referring to is what I say about, normally Cornwall's used as a backdrop for other people's story, and it's normally somebody from London or, an urban place who arrives in Cornwall thinking that they are a balanced person, but and a happy person, but by interacting with the simple folk that live in Cornwall, they realise something's missing from their life, and it's normally to do with some kind of earthiness. And through that interaction, they learn something about what it really means to be a person, and then they go back to their old life, changed for the better. The Cornish people never change; they are just background. So you have a stupid one, a brassy one, a funny one, another stupid one, a clever one.
Yeah,
but at
who's read a book or two.
At some point in the story, you realise that person isn't actually from Cornwall. They've just lived there for a long time.
Right,
and they
gotcha.
came from somewhere else. And it's just late. It's just late. If you want to write a stupid character, just give them a Cornish accent. Simple. If you're lazy, or you investigate what that character actually is, and but people tend not to do that. But what I wanted to do was to bring that background to the foreground and make more complex characters out of the Cornish people, the people that I know, who are all different. I told you the story earlier on about a fisherman kind of accosting me in the street and telling me that he'd seen the film. And then went on to sort of talk to me about at first I was thinking, oh no, is he unhappy with the way that the fishing industry is being portrayed? But then he went on to display this knowledge of film and sort of referenced other stuff whilst talking about bait. He goes, every people are portrayed as being so simple in terms of who they are and where they're from, but actually everybody is a complex being, and you don't see most of those people on screen. Most people are used as background for a certain type of person's story, and film culture suffers as a result.
I just wanted to say, I think it's fair to say that throughout your films they are quite bleak. You know what I mean? It could be read that way, let's say. I've just wondered if you do ever get any pushback from people in Cornwall whose sensibility might be, why can't it be a lighter, more positive representation of Cornwall?
Yeah, and the only negativity I've had towards the film is from some Cornish people who don't like the way the Cornish people are portrayed.
Right.
And the big fear going in, not necessarily from me, but well, a little bit from me, was the portrayal of the incomers was going to be problematic, but a lot of it has been from people who want to recognise themselves on screen and are worried about how they're being portrayed, which I completely understand. But I think the film's got it's not a feel-good ending,
no.
But there's a note of positivity.
Yeah.
At the end of the film, there is the fishing continues. And there's a young generation on that fishing boat, and the young generation is female. I think all of those things that's all very deliberate. That was the message at the end. And there's hope in it. There's always hope in any situation.
And it's interesting as well because the politics are kind of ambivalent. Because on the one hand, you could just sort of maybe react and say, oh well, you're just saying that all these people coming in are really kind of problematic. And I don't think, I've heard you talk about entitlement a lot.
It's Nigel Farage.
Yeah. Well, yeah, true. But like I've heard you talk more about sort of, it's not the economics and the money coming in, people visiting, it's the entitlement. And I've heard you sort of talk about that.
Yeah, because people ask me, people who haven't seen the film ask me what the film's about. People who have seen the film tell me what it's about, which is really helpful as well, because it does make me realise what it is about. But for me, people say, what's it about? And sometimes I say, it's about fishing, but it's not really about fishing, or it's about tourism, and it's not about tourism. For me, the film's about entitlement, and what a poison entitlement is, certainly within British society. I think we've seen that recently with a recent TV interview, the sense of entitlement that some people have, and still we send our kids out into the street to wave flags at these people. And I think that runs through society from the top to the bottom, and it's so dangerous, and it's so ill-conceived, and it's so destructive, and it's so ugly. And from an example like that to another example, in Cornwall in the summer, near where we live, there's a tiny little beach that nobody really knew about, but a lot of people know about now. And people park all over the road so they can go down to the beach, normally in huge black Land Rovers. And then in the summer there was a situation where there was nowhere to park, so people were parking in the bus stop. So the bus stop was full of these huge cars, and the bus couldn't stop because it couldn't get off the road and into the bus stop. And that bus is filled with people who are cleaners going to clean the houses of these people, And it's, I just looked at that one and thought, that's it. That's that's the Cornish postcard for me.
Yeah.
Is this total lack of balance? This idea that if you've paid a bit of money, you can do anything, or even worse, if you've been born into a bit of money, you can do anything, and it's disgusting.
So, does anybody have any questions for Mark? Pretty scared. At the back. Is there any? Nobody's coming. I'll pass this back because I do need you on the recording.
Hi, thank you very much for coming along, Mark. I wanted to ask a question. It's quite prevalent that the music that you use in your finished films are very atmospheric and very kind of slightly ambivalent soundscapes. I was wondering, when you're in the writing process, do you use music that you know you're going to want to use, or do you use music that you just kind of have in the background and it filters in?
The actual score of the film?
Yeah, but also like when you're writing, do you play like music that you know that you can rely on just to be in the background to help you focus?
Yeah, sometimes. I tend to listen to music all the time to sort of determine my state of mind. So I listen to a lot of ambient music. The score for Bait I did myself, and I did that at the end of the editing process. The latest short film I did, we had a composer, Kingsley Marshall, who created a palette of sounds beforehand that not only did I work on pre-production listening to, but also played it on location while we were shooting, because I don't record any location sound, so I can play music while we're shooting as well. The new film that we're shooting in May, I'm now doing the score at the moment, and the score to a certain extent will determine quite a lot of the visuals. And in fact, some of the film is set underground, so we're getting to the stage now where once bits of the score have been recorded, we're actually going to now take them underground and play them in old mine shafts and re-record them and stuff. So the score is something that happens really early on. With Bait, there was never meant to be any score on it at all, but I bought an old analog synthesizer to play around with to distract me from the edit of the film, because I was getting too consumed with the edit. But because it was playing in the studio, like you say, it became background for the film and ended up going into the film.
Any other questions?
Hi Mark.
Hello.
Just awesome to see the trailer again. My question is, with the success of this film, how are you going to manage to retain the same kind of DIY, hands-on control that you've had in your films to date? Are you excited about branching out and having bigger budgets, or do you want to stay in your very kind of control vision this is me, I'm in my film kind of feeling?
Yeah, smaller budgets would be better. We lost a load of money just before we filmed Bait, which was the best thing that happened creatively to the film, because I had to do a very quick rewrite, which meant that originally in the script there were 2 boats, and both of the brothers both had a boat, and with the rewrite, with the loss of the money, had to remove one of the boats from the film, which meant that then the younger brother then was fishing off the beach rather than with a boat, which is this kind of the iconic heart of the visually of the film now, which I never would have written unless we'd lost the money later on. So I don't want to do anything big budget, certainly not next. So luckily I've written something before Bait was finished that is ready to go, so we're going to shoot that in May. We're just financing it at the moment, which is proving to be a lot easier than financing Bait. It's not taking quite as long, which is good, but we'll see. You're only kind of as good as your last film, and I know because of the critical and now ridiculously the box office success of Bait, I know that I'm in a very privileged position. But if the next one's crap, then I'm going to be back to square one. So the more I can control it, the better for the time being, really.
I'm sorry if you mentioned it in the first 10 minutes because I was late, but what is that post-production process for the processing literally and developing and processing that you do? Take us through it.
Well, for Bait, it was so the whole film shot on a clockwork Bolex camera, so on 100-foot rolls of film, all shot silently. And then I hand process everything frame by frame in a small developing tank in my studio. And for Bait, it took about 3 months, working 6 days a week to process every frame. And then it's scanned. Kodak then do a digital scan for me to do the edit. And then I edit digitally and then revoice everything and then add all of the sound on. And then when that's finally finished, it's then printed back to 35mm. Or to a DCP, depending on where we're playing.
And the scratches come from you in a bath. Not you. Film in a bath.
You've been looking through my window. The scratch. Somebody said to me, it's amazing how you spent all that time adding all of that grain and the scratches, and I always have to say that's my best attempt at processing film. And actually it's a really clean negative and a really pristine negative until it gets to the washing stage, and I've got no way of washing film without it scratching because it's just done in a bucket underneath a tap in my studio. So there's 100 foot in the bucket and it just turns slowly in the bucket, so the edge of the acetate scratches the emulsion, and that's just the way it goes. And you can kind of tell the more scratched it is, the more the tap must have been turned on when I was washing it. And there's bits, there's the bit where there's a shot that's in the trailer where there's some plastic bags being hung on door handles and it all sparkles, and that's just one roll of film that did that in the whole lot that I processed. And it was because the studio door was slightly open when it was drying, and it's pollen that just came in and dried into the emulsion. So it's all very haphazard. I know what's likely to happen, but to what extent those things then happen is out of my control. But that's what I love about it. You're never quite sure what you're going to get.
What was the ratio of shooting to?
3-1. So we shot 4.5 hours of footage for a 90-minute film, and it was I just shoot one take and then one safety. So it's not, people always say that's 2 takes, but it's actually 1 take, and then I don't vary it. I don't say, right, let's do something different. It's an exact replica of the original take, just so that if there's a technical problem. So and pretty much everything gets put in there one way or another. I tend not to. I think there was one shot on the whole shoot that we did that didn't end up in the film.
We maybe have time for one more question.
Hi. You're obviously a big advocate for using film. And with things like The Lighthouse using film, do you feel there's a bit of a resurgence in film, getting that warmth, maybe imperfections in filmmaking? Do you feel that's sort of starting to come back more, becoming more prevalent?
Yeah, I'm surprised at how many films seem to be shot on film now. While we're being told that it's all over for film, but then you have to question who it is who's telling people that. I mean, I've been travelling with the film internationally since February, and I've seen so many films that are shot on film. But that might be because I'm at sort of art house film festivals where people are more likely to shoot on film. But I think what's encouraging is people with no money shooting on film, people with very small budgets. Because I think what the danger was that if it's people like Chris Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, and Steven Spielberg advocating for shooting on film, they're a certain type of director. And there's a danger that then that shooting on film becomes something that's elitist and sort of like top dollar. Whereas working with amazing producers, we were able to put together a way of working and finance that meant that we didn't spend a lot of money, but we shot on film. And that's the thing that people seem to be most surprised about. People within the industry are constantly saying, well, how did you shoot it on film? It's just, just don't waste anything. It's the most wasteful art form, the amount of sort of, like the lack of discipline that, it's fine if you design a project that's very free-flowing and wasteful, that's fine if that's in your intention, but people kind of, people who go like miles over budget, you think, how did you do that, So I think, I love film. My favourite film of last year was a digital film. So I'm not a snob about it. I think sometimes I see films that are shot on film that I don't like because I don't feel the work's gone into it. And other times I see a film that's shot digitally and you can just see the amount of work and heart and soul that's gone into it. So I love all sorts of film, but personally my strength is working with film. I think certainly working with film's the thing that makes me excited to get up in the morning. And if you're going to make films, I think you've just got to love what you're doing. And any other way of working, I wouldn't have that enjoyment. And I think that's probably, there's a lot of people who feel like that, I think.
Well, we're out of time there. Can I just say it's great to get you back on the Cinematologist, your spiritual podcast home. We knew about you many years before Mark.
Don't worry. I do keep mentioning you as
I know.
And hopefully I'll still be on the podcast when my career's gone down.
We'll keep you there, don't worry about it. But, please join me in thanking the brilliant Mark Jenkin.
Thank you.
I listened to that the other day because at the festival I wasn't around for that session. I was off doing another thing, so it was really interesting to hear it kind of separate from the weekend. And I thought you did a really great job of contextualizing his kind of career and drawing out those threads of both form and content from like Golden Burn and Vertical Shapes into what Bait is. And also there was a lot of stuff there that I haven't heard him sort of talk about and read a lot of interviews with him this year and talked to him. So kind of good job. And what was your thinking in terms of approaching the conversation?
Yeah, cheers, man. It's interesting because B asked me, how much preparation you have to put in for Q&As, and I said, well, if it's a full screening, which we didn't have this time, generally you're asking 4 or 5 questions afterwards to kind of warm the audience up, and then it's over to them because you've only got 20 minutes. But these ones I've done before where it is an hour or so, and there are clips kind of welded in to the narrative. So you've got to kind of paint a narrative, and it's whether you go, how much you sort of go chronologically. And this seemed, it seemed obvious because we were talking a lot about Golden Burn, which is his first feature, although, that is a sort of contentious definition as Mark outlined at the beginning. But I wanted to talk about the ways in which his relationship to Cornwall, his development as a filmmaker, the kind of ups and downs of that, how he saw himself in relationship to the kind of films that he made. And then I sort of wanted to draw him out a little bit more on the politics of it, because I think I've seen him give a couple of Q&As where he's been ready to go, you know what I mean? And the questioner has sort of gone on to other things. And I felt that I wanted to let him have that sort of latitude, you know, as much as you do as a crowd. I mean, he doesn't need me to let him, but do you know what I mean? Set him up for that and maybe sort of push him in a few different directions when it comes to that politics. Because I think it's interesting in terms of the film and whether it's got a political agenda, and whether that political agenda is very specifically kind of class/regionalist in terms of Cornwall identity is this pure thing, which I think, you know, I don't think he's saying that, but I think that there are sort of difficult ambivalences in the film. Like, say, for example, we talked a little bit there about the fact that European money comes into Cornwall and Cornwall votes leave, do you know what I mean? And there's sort of ambivalences around that, and I think that's what the film does allude to without setting a didactic political agenda up. And I think that sort of Mark talks about that, although he's very strident, I think, on that notion of entitlement, but I think that goes to a wider concern, you know, about the way that sort of British culture and culture generally, or sociopolitics generally, is at the moment.
But I think that's one of the reasons that the film has struck a chord outside of the UK as well. You know, it's played all over the world, and he's had very similar responses. It's political because Mark is political, and he's interested in society and culture, and it's not a preachy, you know, these people are bad and these people are good treatise, but it contains a seething fury and an interest in just trying to unravel, or just show, not even unravel, because it's how do you unravel the situation that we're in as a world, but to show the complexities and what those kind of effects have on people, and how that builds, you know, in particular in the character of Martin, like how all of these different micro aggressions, or, you know, these things that have happened and huge kind of life changes have resulted in his inability to navigate the world, and what that leaves on a person. And when you hear Mark talk about it, it's clear that he's driven by a desire to represent the world as he sees it, and not in a simplistic way, either formally or content. And that was really interesting to hear that perspective from him so passionately articulated.
Yeah, and I think there's also a sort of a politics in the aesthetic that maybe is not something that is a conscious thing. But, you know, it's interesting, like, say, for example, to hear him talk about Cornwall as a theme park. You know what I mean? And we in the last few weeks and months, people have been talking about kind of like theme park aesthetics, haven't they? And I think that when he talked in the Q&A about the local fisherman who had seen his film and proceeded to sort of place it in a kind of cinematic context, and he was like, yeah, you know, of course people are smart enough and understand that this is a particular kind of visual process, or something is going on here that is outside of the mainstream way that films normally look. And I think that you know, it pertains to, perhaps there is a politics of the image here, and because the film has done so well and so many people have sort of responded to it, it does tell you something about the way that audiences are perhaps taken for granted, or filmmakers don't expect them to work, and that separation between here's a mainstream audience and here's an art house audience is something that I think is fundamentally problematic. And hopefully, like, you know, a film like Bait shows that if the film industry and the concerns and the aims of say the British film industry were better aligned, then you would see a much more diverse kind of filmmaking, you know, in wider places. I mean, there's places that we and you can know and can go and see these films, but I think, you know, it's very difficult unless it's, to say, somebody who wants to see an interesting film but is not going to be sort of on film Twitter or reading, you know, the film magazines or what have you.
Yeah, I was talking to Mark Cosgrove from the Watershed at the BFI recently about Bait, and we were both just kind of like, isn't this brilliant? that this has happened. But we were talking about the fact that one of the things that's brilliant about it is that it's done really well, and it's had a really big audience in the UK. And what's unusual is that films like Bait don't often get that, but that's not to say that it's a surprise that audiences have enjoyed it, which might sound like a contradiction, but of course they would like it if they saw it. It's a brilliant movie, and it is fun, and it is interesting to look at, and it is about something, and the performances are great. And I think as well, Mark is such a visual person, and his work with Dion Starr, who did the image and the design and the branding and stuff, there's something about it that drags you in instantly with that image, which is not necessarily, it's not planned but everything about the film works, and you can see why people are like just drawn to, what's this about? This, I don't know what this is, but they're not turned off when they're in there. They're not turned off by the fact that it's black and white or that it's 16mm or the sound, they just go with it because audiences will, and we were sort of saying it's a reminder that audiences can take something other than what they're given on a regular basis, and that's been really encouraging as well. The problem is whether that leads to anything, and I do worry that it will be held up as the kind of the forerunner of a renaissance, not because it doesn't deserve to be, but because so many films have done that. But there's the structural waves underneath it are not necessarily going to be there to actually to impact on it. So I hope that it kind of does lead to more adventurous programming across the place. But what's also encouraging is that Mark doesn't care. No. He's like, in the sense that he already knows what he's going to do next, and he's already working on what he's going to do next, and he's just going to do it. And he's not a filmmaker who is thinking, oh, now I can do this, because he's seasoned enough and individual enough to know that those two things in terms of what an audience can take and want, and what they're given, and what the film industry at all its levels kind of gives them, are not always aligned. Very rarely are they even. So.
Mark's definitely not interested in being sort of the bellwether of a renaissance, you know what I mean? Because he's not interested in those sort of taxonomies, and because it's a fool's errand, really, I think, trying to sort of say, oh yeah, here's this wave, because all of that is structural and economic. It's nothing that a filmmaker per se can do. I mean, I just hope it opens the right doors for him, or at least sort of gives him a position where he can have opportunities to make more films that then will develop further his mark as a filmmaker. And like, say, for example, the comparison with, say, something like The Souvenir, I think is an interesting one, because, on the one hand, on that Sight and Sound poll, The Souvenir was number one. And I think that is such a film that sits within the art house cinematic discourse so readily, in terms of the person who made it and the background and the support that person has had. I don't want to sort of say that the subject matter is not important, because I think it is important, and I think it's an incredibly interesting film. But I think there's a sort of... Bait doesn't come from that same filmmaking complex, I think. I'm struggling to find the right words for it, but it seems to me that's a film that I'm not surprised that that's number one on the Sight and Sound poll, because it fits into that kind of sensibility of a film-going audience in London who is interested in sort of cinema speaking to itself and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying again like that doesn't have interesting issues around sort of gender identity and power structures and relationships and all that kind of, and even class to a certain extent. But I think there's an anger and a rawness to Bait that gives it that thing that makes it an important film, a very important film for the moment, and is doing something, I think, beyond what a film like The Souvenir is doing, which is a subjective thing. I know. But I think Souvenir played gangbusters at Sundance and there's very few British critics at Sundance because it's so expensive, and it played really well in Berlin, and again, huge international, and both are examples of filmmakers who are known to cinephile circles, moving into a completely different space,
you know, and to see a filmmaker like Joanna Hogg, see a woman top the Sight and Sound poll with a film which is, you know, just so kind of endlessly cinematic in its tone, in its construction, in its aesthetic, in its approach, in its kind of, they're both resolute in telling exactly the story they want to tell, which is a deeply personal one about where they come from, and, you know, fuck what anyone thinks, you know, which I just think they're both equally powerful. They both do amazing things with underrepresented points of view. And what I mean by that is, although we see a lot of rich people on screen, you know, we don't see them like they are in The Souvenir. We don't see them as nakedly human as they're portrayed. And Hogg's openness to kind of, you know, mine her own past, I think is kind of remarkable. And you know, not brave, but it is something that men are lauded for doing all the time. And it just feels like, why are we not lauding this woman for doing it? Scorsese's The Irishman. You know, how many plaudits can you give to a man who's being really reflective? And these are, you know, essentially very rich murderers, you know, but we love them. You know, we love spending 3.5 hours with these rich people who murder people and are made rich by murder, but we can't spend 2 hours with a woman of privilege, kind of wrestling with that privilege. I find that really problematic as a kind of, and I'm really pleased to see The Souvenir on that top of that list, because I think it would have been easy to put Tarantino on there. It would have been easy to put Scorsese on there. And I just find this kind of, and just being in Berlin and knowing there was 2 British films in Berlin that were the talk of the festival, and they were both shot on film, and they were both very personal stories, giving us perspectives that are not seen in that way, was so exciting. And like everything, when it comes down to, well, why does it have to be one or the other? It's the problem over and over again with we're trying to find ways of pitting films against each other and making everything a competition. And it's like, that's kind of annoying, because it's like we should be talking about both these films and celebrating them as kind of British masterpieces, because that's what I think they are.
Yeah, no, I take all of that on board. And maybe it's just, again, there is a slight, because I didn't like The Souvenir as much as you did, but I take all of those things on board. And that hypocrisy when it comes to sort of big films that Scorsese or Tarantino have made is definitely there. I'm not arguing that.
Yeah, let me ask a question in terms of, like, could you have imagined, you know, that Mark would have a film in the Sight and Sound top 10?
No, not at all. No.
And it's exciting. It's so exciting. And it's like, it's an amazing achievement for him. One that we knew was deserved. And I was talking to Kings about this morning. It's like, you know, just every day, it's like, can you believe it? And it's like, it feels great that he's getting that level of recognition, and that people are finally seeing what we've known for a long time, which is, this guy is a genius. You know, this guy is he's one of our best filmmakers. He's a brilliant artist, and just can't be more pleased for him in terms of being able to. Every year I read the list, every year, and you know I love lists, and it's just so excited to be able to just see it so close up and see someone who actually deserves it get to that level. It's just amazing.
But I think that's very true, but again, it relates to what I was saying before, because it's kind of like, the reason I say no, I couldn't expect that, is because I just don't think that, you know, a sort of Cornish filmmaker at the back of beyond shooting on 16mm would ever be sort of taken seriously in terms of being in that, you know, in that realm. And again, you know, I understand what you're saying about Joanna Hogg and the sort of gender aspect of it. Yeah, there should be a woman there, and if it was a man with a similar kind of film, we may be lauding that. But I think that there are other power dynamics that stop certain people succeeding, or make it more difficult. The framework's more difficult for them to succeed from whatever their position is. So I think that is a complicated thing, and I just, you know, it is great, exactly like you're saying, that you know, he got accepted to Berlin, and you know that it was the critics there and the audiences there just did see this film. You know, I mean, think of how many films are at Berlin, and it was one of the films that was on everybody's lips.
Amazing, yeah, it was phenomenal, yeah, exciting. It's been a privilege to be, kind of part of the journey of the film and his career to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much, Mark, for coming back to us and keeping us on your radar. Not that he would never have not done that, but you know what I mean. It's just great that he gives us the access and the time and discusses everything with us. But he's down there. He's going to be down there teaching with you and doing the crits and all that very soon. He'll be back to reality.
Well, I mean, yeah, if he is even down here, do you know what I mean? Because I think that's the thing. It's like every week it just gets. We've hardly seen him here because it's just been such a whirlwind year, and with the Biffers, and there's BAFTA nominations, and I'm sure he's going to be in there. Hopefully at the kind of best British film level and the.
Well, if he's not on the best British film list, then you know what I mean. It's not like you would say what's the point, but it's kind of like that's when it kicks back in, and you think, yeah, of course he wouldn't be.
Yeah,
you know
but
I mean?
I'm hopeful that and pretty sure that will happen. And then so who knows when our paths will cross again. So I'm really grateful to Mark for taking the time out of an insanely busy schedule to come to Luton for Filmstock and share his wisdom and experiences with the audience. That was. And obviously for the podcast as well. That was really, really gratifying. So thanks, Mark.
And thanks to you for letting me do that. I appreciate it.
That was a pleasure. Yeah, it was. I've enjoyed being a listener on that. It was great.
It's interesting, isn't it? Just to sort of finish off, and I know we've coming to the end now, but how much maybe the Q&A is a sort of art in and of itself. The hosting of the Q&A, I always sort of find that now, and different people do it different kinds of ways, and I don't know. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that it's kind of goes. But I think we've talked about this on the podcast. But realizing in the last couple of years that I'm really interested in conversation. And I take that very seriously, and kind of doing the sort of setting up these podcasts at the festival the way I did was a chance to have conversations. Because. Kind of I agree with what you're saying about a post-film Q&A is a very specific thing, and often it's just trying to touch a lot of bases and get the audience involved. But these feel like real opportunities, and the podcast has cultivated that sense of actually this is a space where we can do something really interesting. And what was interesting about Filmstock was that we didn't do any of that in the first run. We didn't really have the space. We didn't really take the space, because we just wanted to show so many films. And that clip-based long conversation was not so. So it was interesting with the Filmstock audience how much they loved all of those sessions, because they were like, wow, just the chance to spend an hour listening to a filmmaker talk about what they do, and so many different filmmakers across the weekend, was just a kind of a thrill. And more and more, that's what I'm interested in doing. A lot of the stuff I do for film criticism now is interview based, because I just love it. I love doing this podcast with you for that reason as well, and hearing you. It's great hearing you talk to Mark for an hour, because it's just that's the content. That's the content I want. That's the hot content I'm interested in.
Great, but I think the wheelhouses of us do slightly differ in a way, don't they? So, and that's always useful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To have that. I mean, the stuff obviously. The sort of Kieran Evans and the Jeannie Finley and the Mike Carey Q&As were definitely in your wheelhouse, just in terms of both knowing them and knowing what to ask, but also in terms of the kind of filmmaking that you're talking about. So, and I was at the Jeannie Finley one, and I think people will really like that, especially fans of a certain TV show, of course.
Indeed.
Great. So we'll wrap it up there. So thanks very much, Neil. We'll talk very soon, of course.
We will, in about 30 seconds. The secrets are out.
Yes, the time travel exploits of podcast presenting. And
cool. Yeah, no, this was great fun. So yeah, thank you.
No problem. Thanks very much to our listeners for their continued support. You can get in touch with us on the usual channels. We're on Twitter @Cinematologists, on the email cinematologists@gmail.com. And of course, if you really want to support what we do, you could have a look at the Patreon page, get all of our bonus material. We've got a newsletter coming out very soon and other bonus material to come. Or if you just want to support the podcast and help us out a little bit in our running costs, that would be great. But until next time, this has been the Cinematologist Podcast. Thanks for listening.
They tumble and fight, they are sleeps at night.